You've probably been told you think too much, that you overanalyze, that you should just relax, just go with the flow, just stop making everything so complicated. And maybe, for a moment, you believe them. Maybe you thought something was wrong with the way your mind works, the way you think, always reaching, always questioning, always 3 steps ahead, while everyone else seems perfectly content in the present moment. But here's what no one is going to tell you. That restlessness you feel, that constant hum of mental activity that never quite turns off, it's not your weakness. It's not something you need to fix or quiet or apologize for. It's the way a high-processing brain navigates a world that wasn't designed for it. And the loneliness that comes with it, the sense that you're somehow on the outside of normal human experience, it's because your brain is doing something fundamentally different than most people around you. Let me show you what I mean in the psychology of people who have high IQ, backed by neuroscience. When you have a high IQ, your brain doesn't just think faster, it thinks differently. Neuroscience shows us that highly intelligent brains have greater neurodensity, more connections between different regions, and more pathways firing simultaneously. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for complex reasoning and problem solving, is in constant conversation with your limbic system, where emotions live. Which means you're not just thinking about things, you're thinking about how you're thinking about things. You're analyzing your own emotional reactions while they're happening. You're constructing multiple scenarios, evaluating probabilities, and mapping out consequences, all before most people have finished processing the initial question. And this isn't something you can turn off. It's not a choice you're making. It's the baseline operating system of your mind. But here's where it gets isolating. Most social interactions are built on a kind of cognitive shorthand, small talk, surface-level exchanges, and scripts we all follow without thinking too hard about them. How are you? Fine, how are you? Good, thanks. For most people, this flows naturally. It's soothing, even, a way to connect without effort. But for you, your brain is immediately asking secondary questions. Are they actually asking how I am, or is this just a ritual? If I answer honestly, will that violate the unspoken contract of this interaction? Why do we do this at all? And suddenly, a simple greeting becomes a philosophical puzzle. You're not trying to be difficult. You're not trying to overthink it. Your brain just can't see the layers. And when you're surrounded by people who don't see those layers, who don't even know they exist, you start to feel like you're the problem, like you're too much, or not enough, or just wrong somehow. But here's the truth they don't tell you in school, or in those corporate team-building exercises, or in all those articles about maximizing your potential. Your brain isn't wired for shallow engagement, it's wired for depth. And depth, by its very nature, is solitary. Not because you don't want a connection, but because a real connection, for you, requires a level of intellectual and emotional honesty that most casual interactions can't hold. You need conversations that go somewhere, ideas that build on each other, silence that's comfortable, because both people are actually thinking, not just waiting for their turn to talk. And that's rare. Not impossible, but rare. So you spend a lot of time alone. Not because you're not a social media person, but because you're anti-superficial. Your nervous system literally finds shallow interaction more draining than solitude. fMRI studies show that highly intelligent individuals have different dopamine responses in social situations. Where an average brain might get a hit of reward from casual socializing, yours is waiting for something more substantial, a meaningful exchange, a novel idea, a moment of genuine understanding. Without that, the interaction doesn't just feel empty, it feels like work.
Like you're performing a role instead of being yourself. And your brain, wired for efficiency and pattern recognition, starts to ask, why am I doing this? So you stop. You pull back. You decline invitations, ghost group chats, and become too busy for things that don't feed you. And people start calling you aloof, distant, cold. But you're not cold. You're just conserving energy for what actually matters. Here's another thing. When you have a high IQ, your brain doesn't just process information, it processes meta-information. You're not just seeing what's happening, you're seeing why it's happening, how it's happening, and what it means in 17 different contexts simultaneously. Someone says something in a meeting, and while they're still talking, you've already mapped out the logical inconsistencies, the emotional subtext, the unstated assumptions, and the 3 different ways this could go wrong. You're not trying to be critical. You're not trying to be superior. Your brain is just doing what it does, finding patterns, testing variables, running simulations. But to everyone else, you seem like you're always finding problems, always poking holes, always asking, but what if, when they just want to move forward. And over time, you learn to stay quiet. You learn that sharing every thought that crosses your mind makes people uncomfortable, that your version of thinking out loud sounds like criticism, that your natural curiosity reads as skepticism. So you edit yourself. You hold back. You let conversations happen around you while your brain runs its own parallel analysis in silence. And that gap between what you're thinking and what you're saying becomes another kind of loneliness, because you're never fully present in the room. Part of you is always somewhere else, in that internal world where your real thoughts live. Now let's talk about boredom. Because if you have a high IQ, you know this feeling intimately. Not the kind of boredom that comes from having nothing to do, but the kind that comes from being surrounded by things that don't challenge you. Repetitive tasks, predictable conversations, entertainment that insults your intelligence. Your brain craves novelty and complexity the way other brains crave social approval or comfort. Neuroscience calls this sensation-seeking, but it's deeper than that. Your brain has a higher threshold for stimulation. It needs more input, more variables, and more cognitive load to feel engaged. And when it doesn't get that, when you're stuck in meetings that could have been emails, or watching movies with plots you figured out in the first 10 minutes, or listening to someone explain something you understood 3 sentences earlier, your brain starts to shut down. Not because you're arrogant, but because it's literally understimulated. It's like asking someone who runs marathons to take a stroll and expecting them to feel satisfied. The mechanism isn't built for it. So you drift, you check out. You start creating mental puzzles just to keep your mind occupied, counting ceiling tiles in prime numbers, deconstructing the grammar of what someone is saying, imagining alternative scenarios for how this situation could go wrong. And people notice. They say you're distracted, not present, off in your own world. And they're right, because your world, the one inside your head, is often more interesting than the one they're trying to include you in. Not always, but often enough that you've learned to bring a book everywhere, or have a backup podcast queued, or simply accept that you'll spend a lot of time waiting for things to get interesting. Here's where it gets complicated, because intelligence doesn't protect you from feeling. If anything, it amplifies it. That same neural density that lets you solve complex problems also means you feel things with more layers. You're not just sad, you're aware of being sad, analyzing why you're sad, predicting how long the sadness will last, and feeling a secondary layer of frustration about the fact that knowing all this doesn't make it go away. You can see your own cognitive distortions in real time. You know when you're catastrophizing or overgeneralizing or falling into black and white thinking. You can identify the cognitive bias, name it, and understand exactly why your brain is doing it. But that doesn't stop it from happening, because intelligence and emotional regulation are 2 different systems. And sometimes, the smarter you are, the more exhausting it is to be inside your own head. You're both the person having the emotion and the person watching yourself have the emotion, both the one feeling overwhelmed and the one critiquing themselves for feeling overwhelmed. It's like being stuck in a theater where you're simultaneously the actor and the audience, and you can't just experience the moment without also analyzing the performance. And that's lonely in a way that's hard to explain to someone who doesn't live it. Because how do you say, I'm exhausted from thinking about my own thoughts, without sounding ridiculous? Let's talk about what happens in relationships, because this is where high intelligence becomes both a gift and a complication. You see patterns quickly.
You notice inconsistencies. You remember what someone said 3 weeks ago and compare it to what they're saying now. You can predict behavior based on tiny cues, a shift in tone, a change in routine, or a phrase they've never used before. And on one hand, this makes you incredibly perceptive. You understand people on a level they don't always understand themselves. But on the other hand, it makes it really hard to stay in the moment because you're always 5 steps ahead, running scenarios, calculating probabilities. They said they're fine, but their voice got quieter when they said it. That usually means they're upset but don't want to talk about it. Do I push or do I give them space? If I give them space, will they think I don't care? If I push, will they pull away? And you're doing all this while they're still standing there waiting for you to respond to a simple question. Your brain is playing 4D chess while they're playing checkers. And neither of you is wrong. You're just operating at different processing speeds. But over time, this creates distance because you start to realize that most people don't want to be understood as deeply as you can understand them. They want it easy. They want simple. They want someone who takes things at face value and doesn't dig into every subtext. And you can do that. You can play the role, mirror their energy, keep things light, but it costs you something. It costs you the feeling of being known. Because if you're always adjusting yourself to match their pace, when do you get to just be? Here's what I want you to understand. Your brain isn't damaged or suffering from an unknown brain disease. It's not malfunctioning, overly sensitive, or too much. It's a high-performance engine running in a world designed for regular traffic. And yes, that's hard. Yes, it's isolating. Yes, there are moments when you'd give anything to turn it off, to experience the world the way other people seem to, without all the layers and questions and endless analysis. But here's the thing about that engine. It's also what lets you see beauty in places other people miss. It's what lets you connect ideas across disciplines, find solutions no one else thought of, and understand concepts that take others years to grasp. It's what lets you sit with complexity without needing to simplify it, to hold paradoxes without needing to resolve them, to exist in the space between questions without rushing toward easy answers. And that's not a small thing. That's the ability to live in nuance, to embrace uncertainty, to find meaning in the process of thinking itself. Most people can't do that. They need certainty. They need closure. They need things to make sense in a linear, straightforward way. But you don't. You can sit in the not knowing and still find your way through. And yes, it's lonely. Yes, it means you'll spend more time in your own head than in crowded rooms. Yes, it means you'll have fewer close connections, but the ones you do have will be built on a foundation of real understanding, not just convenience or habit. There's a concept in neuroscience called neural efficiency. It's the idea that highly intelligent brains don't work harder, they work smarter. They use less energy to process the same information because the pathways are more streamlined, more interconnected. Which sounds great, except it also means your brain is constantly looking for the most efficient route. And sometimes the most efficient route is to skip the small talk, decline the party, and spend Saturday night reading instead of socializing. Not because you're avoiding life, but because your brain has already calculated the cost-benefit ratio and decided that shallow engagement isn't worth the energy expenditure. And people judge that. They call it antisocial or weird or sad. But what if it's not? What if it's just your brain doing what it's designed to do, optimizing for depth over breadth, meaning over noise, quality over quantity?
What if the thing that makes you feel broken is actually the thing that's working exactly as it should? I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying you should just accept loneliness as the price of intelligence. But I am saying this: you're not missing out. You're opting out. You're not too much or too little or too complicated. You're just wired for a kind of engagement that most people don't have the bandwidth for. And that's okay. You don't need to fix yourself to fit into spaces weren't built for you. You don't need to dull your edges or slow your thoughts or pretend you don't see what you see. You just need to find the people who can meet you where you are. The ones who don't need you to explain why you think the way you think, because they think that way too. The ones who understand that silence can be connection, that depth takes time, that real intimacy isn't about how much you talk, but about how honest you can be when you do. They exist. They're rare, but they exist. And in the meantime, while you're looking, or not looking, or just living your life in whatever way makes sense to you, you get to stop apologizing for how your brain works and utilize the power of your thinking. You get to stop treating your intelligence like it's a burden you need to hide or soften or make palatable for people who don't understand it. You get to own the fact that your mind is a gift, even when it feels like a curse, even when it keeps you up at night, even when it sets you apart, even when it makes you lonely. Because loneliness isn't the same as being alone, and being alone isn't the same as being lost. Sometimes being alone just means you're waiting for the right frequency, the right conversation, the right person who doesn't need you to translate yourself into something smaller. And until then, you have your thoughts, your ideas, your endlessly curious, relentlessly active, beautifully complicated mind. And that's nothing. That's everything. So let me ask you this. Does this sound like you? The overthinking, the boredom in spaces that feel too shallow, the loneliness that comes not from being disliked, but from being misunderstood, the exhaustion of editing yourself down to fit into conversations that don't go deep enough, the quiet relief of being alone, because at least then you don't have to explain. Does it feel like I'm naming something you've carried for a long time without having words for it? If it does, I want you to know you're not the only one, and you're not the problem. Your brain is doing exactly what it was built to do. The world just hasn't caught up yet.